The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Buju Ninindwe Magani Dug Nagamo Mayangan and Dishnakaz, Wabashashi Dodem, Ojibwe Koyendao, Dishnisho Madeo, Madewana Koyendao. So what I said is, greetings, my relatives. My name is Singing Wolf, and I'm an Ojibwe woman, and I'm from the Martin clan, second degree Madewan, and also one of the head water women. I'm going to just sing a prayer blessing, and I'm going to explain to you what I'm going to sing, since you may not be fluent in Ojibwe. First, we recognize and say thank you to the eastern direction, Wabanung, and that's where the sun rises every day, the life comes from. And then the south, Jawanung, and that's also where Ziguan, the spring, comes from. And then in the west, in Gabion, there's a buffalo that stands in that direction and regulates all of the seasons, the waters, day into night, and so on. And then finally, Giwedanung, which is the north, spirit of the north. And there's a white bear that sits in that direction. That's where healing comes from. And then finally, thank you to the earth, where all life comes from, and Ishpaming, the universe. And then finally, in the most profound way, it says thank you to our grandmothers all the way back to the beginning of time, to our grandfathers back to the beginning of time, and also 7 generations forward. And then lastly, but not least, thank you to the most kind creator, Gije Manadu. Wabanang shawanang in Gabian Kiwedanang. Wabanang shawanang in Gabian Kiwedanang. Mi gwech wendan ni mama haki. Mi gwech wendan ishpaming. Mi gwech wendan bimadizewin. Mi gwech wendan no komisanan. Mi gwech wendan mishomisanan. Mi gwech wendan gije manedu. Mi gwech wendan no komisanan. Mi gwech wendan mishomisanan. Mi gwech wendan gije manedu. Ajuena Mishanan Gije Manedu. Ajuena Mishanan Gije Manedu. Ajuena Mishanan Gije Manedu. Ajuena Mishanan Gije Manedu. Nikani Kani Kanigana Miigwech.
The chaplain for today is Sharon Day, Executive Director of Indigenous Peoples Task Force in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Hussein.
Okay, Senator Cobb.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein, present. Momani Hiltsley.
Here you go. Go ahead, Hilda.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House 94th Session 2025, 7th Legislative Day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Thursday, February 27th, 2025.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Comparison reports. A copy of this order of business is online. If there is no objection, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail and substitutions will be made. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business is on your desk and online. If there is no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading House File number 13.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 28.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 124.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 129.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 924.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 931.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 944.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 977.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 1063.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 1247.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 1253.
Second reading.
And second reading House File number 1329.
Second reading. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading Senate File number 571.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House Files 1744 through 1863.
First reading House files 1744 through 1863. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate File number 823, an act relating to transportation. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodern, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate files.
First reading of Senate File number 823, an act relating to transportation. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Transportation, Finance, and Policy.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for today is House File 12. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 12, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to education, restricting female sports teams' participation to the female sex.
There are amendments at the desk. If there is no objection, we will let the author explain the bill before we act on the amendments. I recognize the author, Representative Scott, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Today we have before us House File 12, and it is written to amend Chapter 121A in statute. And even a Minnesota court has identified 120A in statute as Minnesota's Title IX chapter. And the title of the chapter is Athletic Programs, Sex Discrimination. This bill gives a definition for a female and then goes on to restrict female-only teams to only females. And Madam Speaker, with that, we'll go ahead to the amendments. Thank you.
Representative Jordan offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Jordan moves to amend House Bill number 12, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded DE11.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Jordan, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Speaker Demuth. And members, my DE11 amendment is language that works for sports in Minnesota. This has been the policy for participation in Minnesota for 11 years, and this amendment is rather simple. It states that kids get to play on the sports team that they identify with. This is our current policy in Minnesota. It has worked well for 10 years. And in fact, Minnesota is a state that really prides herself on participation in girls' sports. We have seen, since this has become the policy of the Minnesota High School League, we have seen an explosion in girls' sports and participation across our state. We've added new sports like wrestling and other sports. I'm not much of an athlete myself, but in that time, the participation of girls has exploded. We are 22nd, Minnesota, in the country for population, but amongst girls in athletics, we are number 10. So we have lots of girls participating in sports. This is something that works, and this makes sure that all of our students, no matter whether they are cisgender, whether they are trans or non-binary or two-spirit, can play with the sport team that aligns best with their gender expression identity. So if you want to keep prioritizing girls' sports and making sure that kids can just play and be kids, this is the amendment for you. Please vote yes. And Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call on my amendment.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, my bill was written to preserve girls' sports for females only. The Jordan Amendment erases girls' sports. I encourage a no vote.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given the importance of whether this amendment goes on or not going on the bill, and given that I see some empty seats, I would request a call of the House. And thank you, Madam Speaker.
Do I see 10 hands? There's been a call of the House requested. Seeing 10 hands, there will be a call of the House. The clerk will take the roll. call the names of the members that are participating remotely.
Hussein.
Ready? Here you go.
Hussein, present.
Hussein, present. Momani Hiltsley.
Here you go, Hulda.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
Madam Speaker, I request that the clerk read the names of those who have not yet voted.
Everyone has voted, and the clerk will close the roll. Further discussion? I recognize the member, Representative Curran.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise to request a yes vote on this DE11 amendment. And first, to the queer, trans, non-binary, two-spirit communities, you are seen, you are respected, you are worthy of joy and success. You have done absolutely nothing to invite this political fight, and Democrats in Minnesota have your back. The underlying bill is unconstitutional. This DE amendment is in alignment with basic human rights established in the state of Minnesota and current practice that has served students, families, and schools quite well. The DE11 codifies each student's right to equal access without discrimination. This is the Minnesota that we know, one that refuses to scrutinize and bully children who just want to play the sports that they love with their peers. This DE11 reflects Minnesota's true values. Just let them play. Members, we have an opportunity to turn this bill and this floor debate into a unified message to kids across the state that we recognize basic human dignity and acknowledge the existence of gender diversity. So let's vote yes on this DE11 and promote the values of Minnesotans across the state. Thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, if you really care about girls' sports and children's sports, you will support this DE amendment. This is the policy that works. This is the policies that has seen record participation of girls in girls' sports. This is an amendment that replaces an underlying bill that will have a chilling effect on girls' athletics and replaces it instead with a policy that works. So members, please vote green on this amendment.
The clerk will take the roll. The House is under call. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Hussein.
Go ahead.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein, aye. Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 67 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the call of the House be lifted.
Representative Niska moves that the call of the House be lifted. All those in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion is lifted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Falconer moves to amend House Law number 12, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded A3.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Falconer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. My amendment is to protect our kids from unnecessary and invasive medical examinations. As a coach for high school sports and as a parent of a high school athlete who is non-binary, I have a lot of problems with this bill. This amendment addresses only one of those problems. The author's own testifier, Dr. Pullen from the Christian Doctors and Dentists Association, said in committee that one of the mechanisms to enforce this bill would be that girls have to prove their sex by having to go to a doctor for a medically unnecessary anatomical exam of the reproductive system. Really? That's what we're legislating here today. And indeed, this was in the original language of the author's bill before it was removed by amendment in committee. However, still, this intent is still enforceable. But rather than writing the words down here, it's up to school districts or the high school league to come up with their own policy. The author had mentioned as such in committee. Well, I can't think of another way when a child's eligibility is challenged due to questions on their sex, how that could be proven. What are we doing here? Let's step back for a second and look at this from a holistic point of view. Girls and women in our society already face a higher level of scrutiny on their physical appearance than men do. And we only have to look to Utah, where recently an athlete was challenged for her eligibility because someone thought she looked too much like a male, so obviously must have been trans, which, besides being hateful, hurtful, and horrible to do to a child athlete, this public process subjected her to public backlash, where she's had to incur special police protection from the hateful and violent extremists that support legislation like this. The message this bill sends is that girls, sure, you can play sports, and yeah, we want you to be good and have fun, but if you're too good, if you jump too high, if you run too fast for too long, if you have more muscles than the stereotypical female has, well, you're obviously cheating. We should challenge your eligibility and force you to prove what reproductive organs you have. The effects of this bill are that if girls are too good at sports, something's amiss, and we must find out via medically unnecessary, invasive, and very personal examination. That's just gross, and it's just wrong. And this is what my amendment is trying to address. However, it's obvious that given the secondary amendments that have been filed, it is clear that the central concern will not be addressed in the way that needs to be addressed to adequately protect our kids. So rather than weaken the protections I am offering in my amendments, I move to withdraw the amendment.
The amendment has been withdrawn. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Freiberg moves to amend House Law number 12, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded A5.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So in committee, the bill author said the purpose of this bill was to protect athletes. Now, assuming that is the purpose of the bill, and assuming that the purpose is not in fact scoring political points against a tiny minority of vulnerable children, subjecting kids to unnecessary examinations, or giving state sanction to bullies, then this amendment should be an easy yes vote. This amendment simply says that before participating in athletics, a school must submit a statement that its athletes are vaccinated against diseases like diphtheria, polio, whooping cough, and measles, unless the vaccine is contraindicated for medical reasons. This amendment will clearly protect student athletes. There's a measles outbreak in Texas that led to the first measles death in the U.S. in a decade. Even the anti-vaxxer Health Secretary Robert Kennedy acknowledged the seriousness of the situation, said ending the measles outbreak is a top priority, and is now calling on Texans to get vaccinated. So with that, I look forward to the discussion.
Madam Speaker, point of order.
State your point of order.
Madam Speaker, I rise under House Rules 3.21, germaneness. The Freiberg Amendment greatly expands the scope of the bill, does not, in the language of the bill, mention vaccinations at all, and he is taking us in a direction that the bill does not go, so I would ask that you find the point of order well taken. And I am prepared to offer advice if I haven't done enough already.
Advice.
He's expanded it way beyond where the bill is going.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill is in the education section of the statute, so is the school vaccination statute, so I would suggest that you find the point of order not well taken.
Further discussion. I am ruling that the point of order is well taken. There are no more amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 12.
Third reading. Any further discussion? I recognize Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I want to just take a moment, and I want all of us to imagine a 5-year-old little girl, carefree, joyful, playing in a soccer game in front of spectators, and she scores a goal. Now, I want you to imagine that same little girl, maybe your daughter, when she learns that someone from the crowd has pointed her out to evaluate her, to question her body, her very existence. And now, instead of practice, she must head to the doctor's office and succumb to expensive and invasive medical testing just to prove herself. And it doesn't matter who points her out, coach, parent, spectator, a kid from the other team, a kid from her team. They are all strangers to her, strangers with zero stake in her well-being. HF 12 gives the legal right for this to happen to all of our daughters, trans or not. And it was confirmed in committee that this legislation legally allows for this exact scenario to play out. And I know that because I asked the author myself. I asked directly, does this bill give anyone at any time, for any reason, the legal right to question a girl's gender identity as young as 5 years old? Her answer, yes. Let that sink in. This legislation, by design, invites any person to demand a sex check for any girl athlete whenever they feel like it. It is not a simple bill. And where's the oversight? There is none. For elementary age girls, physicals aren't required to play on the 4th grade girls volleyball team at a private Christian academy or on a community ed Pee Wee girls soccer team, both educational institutions outlined in this bill. So how does this work when no physicals are required to play? Who handles it when there is a sex check demand from a spectator? The 14-year-old ref? The dad coach? The head pastor? What enforcements are used when a 3rd grader has to submit, by law, to intrusive medical testing? Who is overseeing the safety of this child? And at the secondary level, the Minnesota State High School League oversees and sanctions a wide range of sports for high school students, but not all, like ultimate frisbee or mountain biking. So who has official oversight of these girls and these teams? How does that work? Who is accountable to our girls? Who manages all the accusations? As a mother of 2 daughters, a former and current varsity athlete, I will tell you how this works. This bill creates a path for intense scrutiny and harassment for the 200,000 Minnesota girls who currently play sports ages 5 through 18. This bill puts all girls at risk. House File 12 is as absurd as it is predatory. So again, if this bill passes, a 5-year-old girl playing soccer, no matter her gender, will be forced to prove what genitals she has at the will of any stranger. How incredibly harmful and shameful. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, Madam Speaker, I rise to move that House File 12 be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Civil Law. So the Minnesota Human Rights Act, I think most members would know, falls squarely within the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. And this bill really impacts and, in fact, kind of creates an exception to the Minnesota Health Records Act. It's kind of has a confusing interaction with the act, as a matter of fact. I think there's, in one respect, you could say that the bill kind of bootstraps a new definition of sex into the Minnesota Health Records Act. Very clearly, though, this bill, even though it doesn't mention the Minnesota Health Records Act, it says notwithstanding any law to the contrary. Well, it's pretty clear what law would be to the contrary. And we have a lot of times on this floor or in committee, we have bills that go through that impact the Data Practices Act, also very squarely within the jurisdiction, and in fact by rule within the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. And kind of bipartisanly, we complain when Chapter 13 isn't mentioned, and people try to get around the jurisdiction of the committee by not mentioning Chapter 13, even when they're trying to make changes to the use of data. This bill is no different. Even though it doesn't mention the Minnesota, the Act, the Human Rights Act, it definitely applies to that act. And so, Madam Speaker, this bill needs to go to the Judiciary Committee. Thank you. And I would request a roll call.
Roll call being requested, seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion on the motion to re-refer, I recognize Representative from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise to support this motion by my colleague. So Minnesota has long been a leader in practice in protecting human rights, ensuring that all people, regardless of who they are treated with dignity, fairness, and respect. Our state's Human Rights Act is one of the strongest in the nation, explicitly prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity. This bill, which seeks to bar transgender students from participating in sports consistent with their identity, is not just a matter of athletics. It is a direct attack on the humanity of young transgender Minnesotans and a blatant violation of the principles enshrined in our Human Rights Act. When we legislate exclusion, we are sending a cruel and dangerous message to some of our most vulnerable students, that they do not belong, that their identities are not real, and that their rights are somehow up for debate. This is why this bill must be referred to the Judiciary Committee, because it is not simply a matter of sports regulation, but a fundamental question of civil rights, equal protection, and our obligations under the law. History has shown us what happens when government decides that certain groups of people should be excluded from full participation in society. Minnesota has been on the right side of history before, protecting civil rights, and when others sought to strip it away. We must do so again now. Referring this bill to the Judiciary Committee is not just a procedural decision, it is an acknowledgement that we take our laws, our own values, and the dignity of all Minnesotans seriously. With that, colleagues, I urge a yes vote on this motion.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to share my colleagues' concern that this bill did not go through the Judiciary Committee. That is because, as my colleague said, the Minnesota Human Rights Act protects, in relevant part, full and equal utilization of public educational institutions without discrimination based on sex and gender identity, and declares that this access to be a civil right. I received an email from a constituent who has a daughter who is transgender that really brought home to me the impact that this legislation would have on our communities and on our children. And I'd like to read a bit of that email with her permission. And she gave us some good advice here in the legislature. She recommended against a reactive approach to the concerns raised by this bill. She wrote, "Let's instead create a framework that becomes the model for other states. Let's be leaders and not followers. Let's have meaningful discussions that involve those who this concerns and those who have doubts, peacefully, mindfully, and respectfully. Based on the key relevance of the Minnesota Human Rights Act, I believe that the proper place to have that conversation is in the Judiciary Committee. Thank you.
I recognize Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, House File 12 has 2 citations, 121A.04 and 128C.02. It does not have any Chapter 13 citations, and it does not have any human rights citations. Members, this bill does not need to come to judiciary. This is strictly an education fitting bill as shown by the title of the bill. Please vote no.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Scott, I think when I made some of my opening remarks, you might have been busy there, but one of the things that I said, which was really kind of for your ears, is that the lack of a citation to the proper statute is not determinative. So you and I both complain sometimes when other members try to skip the jurisdiction of our committee by not mentioning Chapter 13, for example, and they just try to do something with data without giving the citation. And we both complain about that. And then here today, I'm really disappointed to hear you actually doing the same thing with your own bill. This is clearly a bill about the Minnesota Human Rights Act, as demonstrated by the fact that we're going to hear another such bill in our committee this very week that does something very similar. So by failing to mention it, it does not change it. It's just a disguised attempt to try to not have it come to the Judiciary Committee where the bill belongs. So I urge members to vote yes on the motion to re-refer.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Liebling, I did hear you the first time that you stated this, and my statement remains the same. The only time a bill is required to come to our committee is if it has a Chapter 13 citation. This does not. Nothing in this bill changes anything about the way student data is treated now. Nothing. Members vote no.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Hussein.
Here you go.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, yes.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. Further discussion. I recognize the member from Meeker, Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have heard a lot of feedback from people all around the state. And today, it's not even tonight, I'd like to just share a few emails that I've received here from some concerned folks around Minnesota. So this is from Kathy in Anoka. As an advocate for fair treatment for female athletes, I believe in preserving female sports teams. Integrity is crucial. These teams offer younger women opportunities to compete, develop leadership, and build confidence in environments designed for their biological and physical differences. Those who are born as males are endowed with larger and more powerful bodies that will possibly be allowing them to win, could endanger females on the teams. Biological females playing against or with males lead to unsafe physical environment and robs girls and their teammates of the opportunity to grow as female athletes and leaders. A concerned dad, Scott. I have one daughter that plays volleyball and another daughter that plays basketball. I have concerns for both of their safety as biological males have both height and strength advantages. I've seen videos of girls getting hurt and worry that this could happen to them. Allowing biological males to compete in female sports creates an uneven playing field, undermining the hard work of young women. Keeping separate teams based on sex ensures equal opportunities and recognition for female athletes. Joy from Coon Rapids. My daughter plays high school volleyball, and it's important that she is playing against only females. Playing against males or with males on her team leads to an unsafe physical environment and robs her and her teammates the opportunity to grow as female athletes and leaders. I encourage you to support this bill and ensure that female athletes are given the opportunity to compete on a level playing field. The preservation of female-only sports teams in educational institutions is a vital issue for the future of women in athletics. I got a couple more, folks. Anthony from Woodbury. Title IX was passed to provide women equal rights in the world of athletics and sports. Allowing individuals who are born as males to compete in sports against women is essentially rolling back Title IX, and that is an extremely short-sighted decision in my opinion. All right, Dan from Sartell. I have 5 sisters. Several of my older siblings had no opportunities for organized competitive sports in high school. The 2 benefit from Title IX and enjoyed sports in high school and college. IMO transgender athletes deride the original intent and principles of Title IX. A male who transitions to female has a distinct biological advantage over females. Not fair. As a father of a gay son, I fully support him and his life choices. I cherish my son-in-law and enjoy visiting with and traveling with both of them. But I simply do not believe a biologically born male can fully transition to female, regardless of surgery or hormonal treatments. Again, House File 12 is about fairness, safety, and preserving girls' sports in Minnesota. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, some of you may not know this, but a lot of you do. I love to talk about Jacques and our 3 kids. Parents like to celebrate their children's successes and then tell everyone who will listen all about them. Our middle child got married in April of 23, and I know I did not train our children not to get married during session, but we rejoiced because our son had found the love of his life, his high school sweetheart. We are also blessed to have our 2 other children getting married this year to their people, and we're so very excited, our youngest in July and our oldest in September. My husband and I have been talking about asking our oldest to marry her partner now. You see, we are worried because our daughter is marrying the love of her life, who happens to be a woman. Legislation like the one we have before us today makes me very worried about what's next. Because members, this is where it starts. With little things like telling your child you don't want them to play with Susie down the street. You tell your child they can't because I just think there's something wrong with that kid. This is where it starts, and inch by inch it continues. You complain to your spouse about the Johnsons living in your neighborhood. You say, I don't care if they were here before us. It's our neighborhood now. This is where it starts. Slowly looking at the person in front of you and thinking that they are less than. Telling your child, I don't like it that Susie goes to your school, and I really don't like seeing the Johnsons at the grocery store. They should just stick with their own kind. This is where it starts. Looking at your neighbor and thinking they don't deserve to share the same public places that you do. This is where it starts, and step by step it continues. I think the Johnsons and their kind should just move. Maybe we should send them to that small city on the other side of the county. That way they're in one place where we can keep an eye on them. This is where it starts. When you look at your neighbor and think they don't deserve the same human dignity that you do. This is how it starts, but it's not how it ends. And history has shown us that this never ends well. It never ends well when you look at your fellow human being and say, you don't get a choice just because who you are. You don't get a choice to play with Susie down the street, a choice of where you live, to marry who you love, to worship how you choose, or to be who you truly are, because you are different than me, because you are less than. My father-in-law immigrated to this country for a better life, because he believed that it would be a country where they would see him as a human being and afford him that dignity, that his children and grandchildren would have that same dignity too. Our daughter was supposed to get married in September to a wonderful woman we already think of as family. But we talked to them yesterday, and we've been talking for a while now. And they are officially getting married in a civil ceremony tomorrow. And I can't be there, and they don't get to have the same ceremonies their brothers do, where it's all at once. They have to do it separate, just in case. And we'll still have that joyous celebration in September. But you know why they're getting married? Because they're watching their courts, and they're worried too. They're worried because of bills like these. You see, this is where it starts. When people stop seeing the humanity in one another, when you see your neighbor as less than you, when you tell Susie's parents that their child can't play sports with your child or their peers just because who they are. But it doesn't have to be this way. As elected leaders here today, at this moment in time, we have a choice. We have a choice to stop and think, is this where we want to start? And if it is, ask yourself, once we do this, where does it end? Members vote no.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Falconer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand again today, not just as a representative from Eden Prairie and Minnetonka, but also as a coach. I proudly coach both middle school cross-country running and high school cross-country skiing. I wish I was standing out just to simply congratulate the Minnetonka High School girls Nordic team for placing second at state just a few weeks ago. It's an incredible achievement, highest placement in school history for Nordic. I'm so proud of what they achieved, and as a coach, I was glad the entire team was able to compete and do their best, whether or not they were in the final set that represented Minnetonka at state. Indeed, every kid should be able to participate. But instead, I'm standing before you and Minnesota as a representative and coach that has a unique experience perhaps I alone in this body has. I've had the privilege of coaching a trans athlete at the high school level in previous years. The too long didn't listen version with the trans girl on the team is, the sky didn't fall. Everyone had a great season. She participated in the team that matched her identity. She competed with and against her peers. She benefited from the physical and mental health benefits sports provides. She was able to have that high school team sport experience so many of us look back on so fondly. And that makes my heart so happy for her, just as it does every kid I coach. I'm asking each of you to consider the impact of your vote. A vote in favor of this ban is a vote against the very principles of inclusion and equality that our state stands for. I implore you to vote no on this measure. This is a piece of legislation in search of a problem. In reality, there are more billionaires in Trump's cabinet than there are trans athletes competing in the NCAA. This highlights how manufactured this issue is, and it raises the question, why are we diverting our attention to this issue when there are far more pressing matters that require our focus, such as lowering the price of eggs, or making healthcare affordable again, or prescription prices, or making housing affordable again, or so many other issues that matter to Minnesotans in their everyday lives. While the oligarchs and the tech broligarchs are currently raiding every social safety net our country has, And the Republican Congress at the same time is using that savings to give themselves and their billionaire owner donors trillions in tax cuts. We're here fighting amongst ourselves whether or not we should pass discriminatory legislation aimed at hurting one of the most vulnerable sets of kids in the state. Kids that already face daily bullying, who suffer from disproportionate mental health concerns, including suicidal ideation and attempts, partially because they feel society doesn't value them. What messages does this dangerous and hurtful bill send to them right now? And that we have nothing better to do as a legislative body than to deny them their rights to dignity while around us the very fabric of our country is being torn to shreds. Banning trans athletes from competing is not about fairness. It is an act that sends a painful message that they do not belong, that their identities are invalid. This is not a sports issue, it's a human rights issue. Every athlete deserves the right to compete, to express themselves, and to pursue their passions without fear of discrimination. By excluding trans athletes, we are not protecting the integrity of sports. We are undermining the very principles of teamwork, respect, and unity that sports embodies, and that teaches our youth that they will carry forward into adulthood. As lawmakers, and for some of us as coaches, we have a responsibility to foster an environment of respect and support. As a coach, and we go through a specific training every 3 years or so on this, our role extends beyond teaching the skills of the sport. It involves nurturing character and instilling values of empathy and kindness to their teammates, to their competitors, and to everyone around them in their lives. We should all be setting examples for our young athletes and all people of Minnesota, showing the importance of inclusivity and the strength that comes from diversity. In closing, I urge all of you to vote against this hateful ban on trans athletes. Let us advocate for policies that embrace inclusivity and support our youth in their pursuit of sports. Together, we can and we should ensure that every athlete, regardless of their gender identity, feels welcome, supported, and empowered to shine on and off the field. As a first-time legislator, I have to admit I'm fairly ashamed at what this body has chosen to focus on today. At a time when our president is being dog-walked by the world's richest person, tearing down and dismantling our government, turning their so-called efficiencies into trillions in tax breaks for his billionaire buddies. And while the rest of us in this room should be focusing on what DC's ramifications are and will be here at home, how we're going to deal with cuts to education, housing, transportation, disability services, elder care, and so much more, they're succeeding in distracting us with yet another culture war issue meant only to divide and distract so they can put our tax dollars in their pockets, add a couple more zeros to their bank account, and leave us fighting amongst ourselves for the few crumbs that are left. Thank you for the time. I ask you to vote no on this harmful, dangerous, discriminatory ban. And please, let us finally begin debate on real issues for all Minnesotans.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Rarick.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's just center ourselves on some things that are facts and data. And I have a report in front of me from the United Nations. So this is a report, gathered information from over 100 different sources. And it was compiled on August 27th of 2024. It's titled, Violence Against Women and Girls, Its Causes and Its Consequences. It goes into a lot of different things, but for this discussion today, let me focus on certain items, as in biological males and girls' sports. And it has a lot to say about that. Under the category of manifestations of violence against women in girls' sports, the very first topic is physical violence. Physical violence. And they were able to demonstrate in this report that particularly volleyball, basketball, and soccer were incredibly dangerous for girls and women when biological males were participating with them. And what was the result? There were knocked out teeth, concussions resulting in permanent injuries, broken legs, and skull fractures. One study that they had looked at even asserted that when you have non-professional athletes and you compare about the same size man to woman, the punching power was measured at 162% more for the men. So same size, same composition essentially, a man can punch a woman 162% more powerful than a woman on a woman. And I'm sure we saw that recently. Exclusion from sports, the next category. Very interesting, because what they found was that girls and women actually self-excluded themselves for what? For fear of physical violence and injuries. So we have women and girls around the world that are so afraid of competing with biological men that they are dropping out of sports. That's what this report is saying. And how does that also play out? Let's look at the opportunities. The opportunities lost. Through March 30th of 2024, 600 female athletes lost 890 medals across 29 different sports to men. So yes, this is happening. Yes, women are losing and men are winning in women's sports. Biological men are winning. So 600 female athletes lost 890 medals across 29 different sports, they found. And again, this was only 100 or so submissions around the world, so I'm sure it's very low. Male athletes have specifically attributed to various sports that they have higher testosterone levels, they have more power, and even it said that even pre-puberty they have advantages. Let's go on to the next category. Sexual assault and violence. And the report says that removing single-sex spaces in sports may also increase the risk of sexual harassment, assault, voyeurism, physical and sexual attacks in unisex lockers and toilets. And it goes on. I've spent my 13 years of legislative career here protecting victims of violence. That's what this bill does. Psychological violence is the next category. The knowledge of female athletes may be competing against male athletes in female sports, including males that identify as female or male that have specific XY differences in sex development, causes extreme psychological distress due to physical disadvantages, the loss of opportunity and fair competition, of educational and economic opportunities, and the violation of their privacy in locker rooms and other intimate spaces. It causes severe psychological stress for these female athletes. The next category in this report. This one is the most egregious to me. And it's not because women have their legs broken or their teeth knocked out or they've gotten skull fractures, but even because they can heal from that. But this is what's most egregious to me. Denial of the right of freedom of expression, opinion, and assembly. Women are being silenced. Women are being silenced. They are being bullied and harassed into shutting up and letting a biological male compete in their sports. We heard that earlier today. When Riley Gaines was here, she said that she had to have a massive police escort, and she did. I counted at least 8 officers surrounding her. And she talked about how her voice was, people were threatening her life and threatening her voice. This is what the UN is telling us, members, from around the world. That women and girls are being threatened, harassed, and bullied into shutting up and letting biological males and boys compete in their sports. We're not allowed to have a difference of opinion. We're not allowed to say what we think. We're not allowed to say, oh my gosh, I don't want this biological male to play against my daughter, my granddaughter, for fear that she might end up with a skull fracture, a broken leg, her teeth knocked out, a concussion. because these things are happening. I'm going to go to the conclusions of this report. It's quite illustrative, and it really gets to a lot of the things that were of deep concern on this House floor. They had a great solution to this invasive medical examination, which doesn't need to be done. It says in the report, produce the original birth certificate to verify the gender. In extreme cases, you could do a buccal swab, but that is rare. It says ensuring that female categories in organized sports are exclusively available to persons of biological sex is absolutely critical. In cases where the sex of the athlete is unknown or uncertain, you can do the buccal swab or produce the original birth certificate. It's not that difficult. It's not an invasive medical procedure. So members, I could not be more proud to stand up and support this bill today. I actually have a 9-year-old granddaughter now that is in competitive swimming. And right now, she does swim against boys. Next year, she will not because puberty sets in. And I can already see, I'm at every single swim meet, members. This is her first year out. And I can see how fast and how powerful those boys are that are just 1, 2, 3, 4 years older than her. They are very, very powerful. They have more testosterone. Remember when I said that a punch from a biological male in one study was 167% stronger than a female? There are so many differences, even before puberty. So members, I urge you to support this bill. Thank you, Representative Scott, for bringing it. And members vote yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I was not able to pull up the stats quickly enough here, but I do know for a fact that trans people and non-binary people are more likely to be victims of crime than to commit crimes. They are highly more likely to be victims of crime than others. And I am, this is really upsetting to me, what words I'm hearing here, because this rhetoric actually hurts people and puts them more at risk of being victims of crime. We talk a lot about rhetoric in the Public Safety Committee and what words mean to different types of groups of people, and I can tell you that this rhetoric is what puts people at risk. I also want to talk for a minute about gender-based violence. I went to law school because I had friends who had been sexually assaulted and nothing had happened about it. I have devoted my career as a prosecutor to working in gender-based violence issues, and I can tell you that the biggest threats to women and girls' safety are not from trans or non-binary people. The biggest threats to women and girls are predatory men. Predatory men who brag about sexual assault and yet get elected to president. Predatory men who are found liable for a jury for sexual abuse, who have dozens of accusers, who have bragged about going backstage during a pageant when women were changing clothes. Predatory men who surround themselves with other abusers, alleged abusers, and elevate them to positions of power. Predatory men who remove sexual abuse from military trainings. Predatory men who freeze funds from the Office of Violence Against Women that's resulting in domestic violence shelters and sexual assault advocacy programs struggling to stay open. And predatory men who eliminate protections on college campuses for victims of sexual assaults. That's who women and girls need to be worried about in this state and in this country, not trans and non-binary people. Members vote no.
I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill touts itself as Preserving Girls' Sports Act, which I think is a curious name for a bill that seeks to ban certain girls from playing youth sports. It's also odd that as this bill was making its way through the various committees and bodies to where it is now on the floor, we heard a lot about thoughts and feelings, but I didn't hear anything about particular girls' sports clubs or teams that were shut down because of trans participation. And in fact, as many speakers have already noted, the trans community is a very small member of our population. The NCAA president, Charlie Baker, told a Senate committee in December that there were less than 10 trans athletes in the entire NCAA across all 50 states, fewer than 10. And yet this is a key bill that is coming before us today, saying that it is preserving girls' sports. But it's not bringing any more funding for girls' sports now that federal cuts are coming to our funding for our schools. No. So I had to ask myself, as I was looking at this bill, as I was thinking about this speech, what is this bill actually preserving? It's not girls' sports. At its heart, this bill is preserving an outdated and harmful kind of gender discrimination. It is stating loudly and clearly that men and women, especially women, must look and act a certain way, must conform to certain attributes and characteristics to be considered real women. No room for diversity, no room for the intersex community, no room for the vast continuum of gender expression, gender experience, any sort of exclusion. This bill says plainly, girls must look one particular way or else. And the or else is they can't play youth sports in this particular bill. And if you don't trust me, if you don't think that that is what this bill is about, believe the bill author. In the Education Policy Committee, when this was brought before the committee, she was asked about the logistics of this bill. And there was question after question, and eventually, after one question, she wanted to give an explaining note on this bill, because we were getting into the weeds. This is what the bill author said, I quote, "I will say this bill is about the obvious thing in front of us that 80% of the country feels and believes, and their eyes do not deceive them. There's a difference between male and female. That's what this bill is getting at. We're preserving girls' sports because there's an unfair advantage if they are in competition with a male. We're trying to protect our girls. That's what this bill does. And because the world we live in is demanding so many definitions of everything, and there's a whole new dictionary of terminology that we are having to learn, in this bill we're having to define what a female is. When most people know and trust what their eyes and their brain is telling them. What most people know with their eyes and their brains. Women and girls, non-binary folks of Minnesota, your womanhood, your personhood must conform to their eyes and their brain. That's what this bill is about. That's what it's telling us. It's clear in the language. This bill says to every female athlete that you better stay within a basic understanding of what a woman is. Do not stray from that. Don't be too fast, don't be too slow, don't make too many threes, don't score too many goals, be a certain shape, don't be too muscular, be modest, maybe don't cover your head, wear makeup, or maybe don't wear makeup, don't swear, smile more, don't embarrass the boys. In fact, we always schedule you before the boys varsity team. Don't be too heavy, don't be too skinny, don't have your hair too short, because you always have to conform, not to your identity, but to the eyes and brains of the people who wrote House File 12. Their opinion matters, not yours. That's what they're saying in this bill. That's the goal, and that is why this bill struggles to define femininity in it. Colleagues who are going to vote on this, have you read the definition that is in this bill that you're going to vote green on? I want to read it to you so you know what the definition is in this bill. A female is defined as an individual who naturally has, had, will have, or would have, but for a congenital anomaly or intentional or unintentional disruption, the reproductive system that at some point produces, transports, and utilizes eggs for fertilization. Are you serious? That's how you want to define what a female is? You think that's common sense? You think Minnesotans are going to be on your side with that? You think judging whether a 6-year-old can play basketball should be based on their potential future fertility? That's what you will vote green on in a little while. You think 80% of Minnesotans are behind? They aren't behind you on this. Imagine flyers at your local middle school. Tryouts for girls' swimming team. Be ready to prove your future or current fertility. Do you honestly think Minnesota parents are going to be on your side when you pass a bill that Saturday at the soccer fields, anyone walking across a game can look at one of those participants and question whether that is a girl or not? And suddenly those parents have to pay for genetic testing or take their child into a doctor's office for an exam that can be very invasive? This is not common sense. This is not protecting youth sports. This is discrimination. This is dangerous, and this is just weird. But I'm going to end with some good news. This discrimination, House File 12, is not going to stand in Minnesota. It's going to fail here today. Trans girls will continue to be able to play girls' sports in our state and learn all of the lessons, have all the experiences that they are currently having. And Minnesota will continue to be one of the leaders in our country for girls to participate in sports. We are proud of that. Very proud. Today, this bill will fail, and ultimately, eventually, the anti-trans and anti-woman agenda that is behind this will also fail. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of this bill. And I'm interested in some of the conversation we've had today. It's been a good discussion. But I think there's been some things that were said that were not appropriate about the bill. First, it was said that it's a dangerous and hurtful bill, and it's saying that we are banning trans athletes from competing. And members, that is not true. And I have passed out, I don't know if it's ready yet, but I'm sending around some sections of statute. So Minnesota law requires that we protect gender identity as a status. So we will do that. So under this bill, trans kids are not being told they can't play sports. They are saying that they cannot play sports outside of their biology. And so the law does both. The law allows no discrimination against transgender kids for their identity status, but it also very explicitly says we have to protect female sports, biologically female sports. So the law has already found that balance. And members, I just want to refer very quickly to statute, which is hopefully coming around. But the first section is Minnesota Statute 121A.04, and it's about sex discrimination in athletic programs. And it talks about equal opportunity and athletics, you know, a big long paragraph I'm not going to read to you. And then in subdivision 3, it says exceptions, notwithstanding any other state law to the contrary. In athletic programs operated by educational institutions or public services and designed for participants 12 years and older in the 7th grade or above, it is not an unfair discriminatory practice to restrict membership on an athletic team to participants of one sex whose overall athletic opportunities have previously been limited. And then there are 2 more sections under this statute. So current law, members, gives the exception for us to have protection for girls' sports. We already have that. So this bill is just sort of the belt and suspenders on that. Then another section, Minnesota Statute 363A.23. This is exemptions for education. And in subdivision 2, it's athletic teams. Notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter or any law to the contrary, it is not an unfair discriminatory practice for an educational institution or public service to operate or sponsor separate athletic teams and activities for members of each sex or to restrict membership on an athletic team participation to one sex if the separation or restriction meets requirements of this section. Again, it's already in statute, members. We already have robust language that protects biologically separate sports teams. And that's what HF 12 does. It just reinforces that. And finally, members, in statute 363A.24, this is based on public accommodations. So this is the locker room question. Again, it says, this provision relating to sex does not apply to restricting membership on athletic teams or in a program or event participants of one sex if the restriction is necessary to preserve the unique character of the team, program, or event, and it would not substantially reduce comparable athletic opportunities for the other sex. Sex in statute is defined as biology. Gender identity is something separate, which we also protect. But trans kids can still play in sports. We are not barring them from playing sports. We're saying we are just upholding the law where we have biological-based sports teams. And members, that is what the law already says, and that is what this bill does. So I encourage you, members, to really think about how important this is. Girls, women predating our generation, my generation, fought hard to get Title IX. They fought hard to have opportunities for girls to play on their own teams and to have sports competitions against people of their own sort of ability. Biological males have more muscle mass. They have better lung and heart capacity. They are stronger. They have more endurance. It's a question of fairness. And the women who fought hard for that want that same thing for their girls. I wanted it, all three of my daughters played sports. I want it for some future grandchildren someday. And it also preserves women's sports so women can continue to get championships. Women can continue to get records and scholarships and recognition for their athletic ability and not have to give up their podium space or their scholarship because a male was faster or stronger. Members, this is a common sense bill. It's already in statute that we protect sports based on gender. So please, members, or based on biological sex, so please vote green.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, listening to some of the comments, I wonder, do you all know any trans people, any trans kids? Think about this for a minute. It's not easy, I think, being a trans person and having this struggle with your gender identity. So you have a kid that has made this difficult decision with you as a parent and decides to transition and become a girl. And they've transitioned their identity. It's made them feel better, feel them part of something. They're making friends, they're working through stuff, and they decide to go play a sport. And then you're gonna tell them, you know what, no, you have to play on the boys' team? Think about that. You need to talk to some trans kids. You know, if we're gonna be talking about trans people, I don't understand why we're not talking about the fact that 1 in 4 are physically attacked because of their gender identity, and 2/3 have been verbally attacked. That'd be worthwhile talking about. So why, at this particular time, with everything else going on in Minnesota and the country, are you bringing this particular bill to the floor right now? Of all the things that you could have picked to make people's lives better, this is what you picked? Because the effect of this bill would be to further exclude and marginalize people who are already being physically and verbally attacked. You know, I think the core question that we need to start with here is, do trans people have a right to exist? I hope everyone would answer that yes. If they do, I believe in this country they should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let's take a step back and think about, we're not talking about college athletics. We're not talking about the Olympics or pro sports. We're talking about high school, middle school, and elementary school sports. Let's take a look at the purpose of pre-college athletics. And I went to the National Federation of State High School Associations, and this is what they say. Athletics are integral to the American education system because they have educational value. By participating in athletics, young people have the opportunity to learn, grow, and develop just as they do in the classroom. These programs promote physical and mental wellness and positive self-image. And surveys have shown that students who participate have higher grade point averages, better attendance records, lower dropout rates, and fewer discipline problems. When students were asked why, the answer was often like this response, quote, "I participate on my high school team because they're more than just my team, they're my family, and I don't know where I'd be today without them." According to a study by the Aspen Institute, the #1 reason why students play school sports is to have fun, engage in exercise, and spend meaningful time with their friends. So why shouldn't trans kids have this experience? You know, I think about this issue, as you probably can tell, as a parent. And I received an email from a parent of a transgender student in my district who said the following to me in talking about this bill. Its real purpose is to marginalize all trans athletes. It is vital to mental health and affirming to be able to play on a team that reflects your chosen gender. It's a trap to say that trans women pose a safety risk or have an unfair advantage to other athletes. There will always be all sorts of body types, regardless of gender. And actually, this is likely to hurt any cis woman that is blessed by being tall or more muscular, as they will be scrutinized for their true gender. No one would choose to go through the trials of becoming trans just to get an advantage in sports. There are very few athletes that are trans, and the ones that are just trying to live an authentic life. And then in her letter, she included these comments from her trans kid. "My outlook on life has grown substantially more positive, and I can see myself being a part of society in the future, whereas before I could not. Should I have not been able to transition, it would not have been truly me. I have a right to happiness and life, a real and full life, just as everyone else gets to have." Please, please, think about the real purpose of athletics in high schools and middle schools and elementary schools. Think about this as if your kid was trans, and then join me on voting no on this harmful bill.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Kozlowski.
Thank you, Speaker and members. I'm standing here, rising again, and sharing, as I have other times, standing up on other bills that have come before us, that as the first of many to come non-binary representatives in Minnesota, and as the only two-spirit representative in Minnesota, but also the country, that's a stark contrast to what we are doing here today and what we're talking about and what we're grounded in. And it's incredibly humbling and grounding that as we started tonight, we were led in prayer by somebody that I hold very dearly, and so does our community, in high regard, and look to as a two-spirit Ojibwe elder. You maybe saw me shedding some tears tonight, because for me, that was a first, that I wasn't the only two-spirit that I know of in this capital. She also spoke to us in Ojibwe language and shared some words, and one in particular that got me, when they said, "Gijawena Magoo," To us, that's a word that we sing in ceremony. The kanigana. We say Odena, Odamen. And that means that you are loved and you are sacred. You are medicine, which is what two-spirit, trans, and non-binary people are, especially our kids. And so I think it's a reminder for us that in a capital that was not only made not for us or by us, but meant to intentionally exclude us. And we've emerged from every attempt by our government, I call our hitman, that has forced to push us down and erase us, that we're still here with a playful wagging of the finger. As politicians and unelected billionaires, from the White House to here in the Minnesota House, we're seeing this doubling down of efforts in an agenda of division, of stoking fear, of stoking harm on our communities. We know that many people say that they just don't know trans or non-binary people, two-spirit folks, that once you get to know us, we're actually pretty great. And I think there's members on your side who spend a lot of time with working on bipartisan bills and just connecting with, that you've gotten to know me and a glimpse into who I am and the communities that I'm here representing. But with over 241 attacks on trans and queer folks, in using the government and courts to bully and blame us for problems that were created by corporate greed on trans people who make up 1% of the population, of people who are not the reason that we can't afford eggs or why our rent is too damn high. And we're facing an era of anti-trans violence that is born of the playbooks of the colonial violence used against two-spirits right here for over 500 years to reinforce the gender binary and use colonial powers to do it. Our US and government systems literally created residential boarding schools to solve the Indian problem. When efforts to assimilate Native adults faltered, they turned to children. And I'll connect the dots here because we've talked about this, but you have to understand why this is deeply connected to what we're talking about tonight. Because the first children that they came for were two-spirits and trans kids as a target. And so while two-spirits and trans folks like Sharon Day right here before us, like myself, like our kids around the state, in the country, are held in highest regards as visionaries, leaders, name givers, these roles and people are important. We need trans and two-spirit children to become trans and two-spirit adults because they are the ones that lead us in our puberty ceremonies, in name giving, who pass on our culture and our ways of being and knowing. And it was only when European colonizers arrived that the idea of two genders were even imposed on us. First, to diminish the voice and roles of women, and second, to vilify people whose genders were not man or woman. We have never been a problem to be solved, Indigenous people, nor trans folks. But the bullies who are grown adults who have created many problems for us in an attempt to keeping us to live our lives and who thereby teach our kids to be bullies is a problem. Problematic bills like HF 12, a bill to bully trans and non-binary kids, is not about fairness in sports. It's about erasing trans girls, non-binary, and two-spirit kids and people from public life. And I said this earlier, and I want to reiterate it, that our children didn't stop being Native and two-spirit just because you snipped our hair and stripped our language from our tongues. And they aren't going to stop being transgender just because you strip them from sports or from housing or from their health care or any other public place that you don't want us to be. And so members, make no mistake that this is just another version of state-sanctioned bullying and genocide. And I don't say that lightly. And while I'm proud of the bipartisan work we have done together, and I appreciate Representative Moeller for speaking to this, that as a trans person, as a victim survivor, we've worked on the Office of MMIR, of Missing Murdered African Heritage Folks. We passed the task force on anti-violence against Latine peoples. We passed the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act with a green board. And we passed children's advocacy centers funding to both respond to and prevent domestic and sexual violence. And yet this bill is a direct and dangerous affront to the work that we've been doing together, in that it incites more violence and taking our time in our lives. Kids like Next Benedict, our two-spirit and non-binary relative, was robbed of time in a school. In Minnesota, we also lost Savannah Ryan Williams, a two-spirit and Latina relative. Sam Nordquist, just this fall, a black trans mask, was robbed of times. And our spirits sound out, Gagi Gay Mikwin Dagozi Wug members, that is the name of the MMIR reward fund that we passed together. They will be remembered forever, but they shouldn't have to be, because they should still be here with us. So for me, growing up as an Indigenous kid with the deck stacked against me, for me, this bill is incredibly personal, as it is to so many sitting here, because sports was my outlet. I played basketball, I played soccer, grew up to play broomball and take back our traditional lacrosse. But it was also an inlet for me through the beautiful game of soccer, that I was able to step into my fullest self as a two-spirit person, to get back into my body after experiencing violence. And one of the things that I want to be crystal clear, that our kids and each other were hardwired for belonging. So for all the little leashes and the little Lees out there who are in schools and in places, especially for our kids of color, for our trans kids, for non-binary kids, it's an awkward, rumbly time to figure out who you are and what your dreams and what you want to do in this big, wide world. That to be able to step on the field and just be seen as another teammate is a really important thing. To know that someone has my back, to know the feeling of going to practice, some tough practices that lead to winning and victorious at a soccer match, to the loss of the sting of a tough loss. All of these things are fundamental to the experiences that grow and teach us how to go up and move in the world and do big things into our work, into our lives. And so I want to be really crystal clear, as we've heard, that this bill also is not about those things. It's actually not about sports or safety. What it is about is that we have a government that wants power and control over us, not with and for us. We have a government that wants to recognize only two sexes as male and female, and that those are inchangeable. We have a government that wants to restrict access to health care, that wants to ban trans girls and non-binary kids from playing sports, from locker rooms and restrooms, and from public life. And we know that our gender fluidity scares people because we refuse to be controlled. My grandma taught me that love means we get to change like the seasons. That's the foundation of sovereignty, of our communities. That's the foundation of what we're taught, myself as a parent, of how to raise our littlest. It's why growing up, my grandma never made me wear the girl clothes or get the boy toys from McDonald's. Besides the car and the dinosaur were way cooler. But we know that clothes and toys are just that, clothes and toys. And for my grandmother teaching me those lessons embedded in me, that what it means to be sovereign, to be capable of perpetual ship-shifting and expansiveness. And I'll tell you that she also taught me that we've always been here and that we're not going anywhere. And in the same way, what I'll continue to stand up here and reiterate that no matter what we do, you can't legislate us out of existence. Never worked, didn't work for Indigenous people. Besides, we're people that try to tell us, no, it doesn't work very good. We're also a community that has been called to shine a light in places where people say there will be no light. And thankfully, our community isn't defined by those who want to do us harm. But as somebody whose Ojibwe name literally is yellow cloud, a big, bright, booming light and voice, I want trans girls and trans kids, non-binary, two-spirit youth everywhere to know this. that no one gets to debate your existence as a trans, non-binary, or two-spirit person, period. People love to act like our identities and our bodies, our spirits are up for discussion, as it has been on Showcase here. But the reality is that there is no one way to be trans, no universal experience of gender dysphoria or euphoria. However you exist, you are valid, and it's not up for debate. And I'll leave you with this. This is actually something I've left with you before, but I think because this bill is before us, it's a reminder that we need the reminder from our fan favorite, Andrea Gibson. I know how much the pain of this world weighs, but we can still skip the scales in light's direction towards love. So to trans kids and girls and non-binary kids everywhere, come be everything you are in this world. Let them play, let them live, let them thrive. Miigwech.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Speaker, members. Thank you to all who have spoken in defense of our communities here tonight, especially Rep. Kozlowski for your amazing remarks. I'm so grateful to be here with you. Oh, where to start, right? I want to start where Representative Kozlowski left off, which is that to be trans is to be wonderful and magical. Our community is a bright light in the world of creativity and chaos a little bit, but it is the greatest joy of my life to be a part of this community. It saved my life. There is no apology. There is no need for apology. We are here. We are queer. We're not going anywhere. And I'm sorry to those of you who are or will watch this later, who feel like for some reason we have to keep doing this, but we'll do it forever, so don't worry, we'll always be here to protect you. I want to bring us back to Representative Robbins' testimony. Rep. Robbins said that this bill doesn't ban trans kids from playing sports. It just requires them to play on the wrong team. It requires them not to be themselves to play. I know that's not the way that you put it, but that's the way that I heard it. And I think this is a really important piece of this conversation. And I'm going to tell you why this bill actually makes me the most angry of all of the bills that have been introduced and starting to be heard, because we know there's a lot of them. But I want to take us back to 2015 to talk about why this bill is not about sports and to talk about why this bill is specifically about forcing the erasure of trans people in order to participate. In 2015, there was a leader of the national Christian right-wing movement. I'm not going to name him, but we had just won marriage equality. And marriage equality had turned dramatically out of favor in terms of trying to ban it. And this person said, we lost, these are quotes, you can look it up, he's done this in interviews. We lost gay marriage, so we knew we needed another fight. We threw everything at the wall, and trans kids stuck. That's a direct quote from the movement leader, one of your movement leaders, who has spent the next 10 years lying about trans kids, lying specifically about what it means for trans kids to exist. And now it is 10 years later, we hear bills like this that tell us, because you are trans, you cannot play. If you want to play, you cannot be yourself. We are not telling you you can't be trans. We're telling you you cannot participate. There is a phrase going around, it comes from another right-wing media commentator. He first said this at CPAC 4 years ago, but it's become a rallying point of what is happening in this country. It's been repeated by members of the new administration, and it is, we must eradicate transgender people from public life. He doesn't say transgender people, but he uses that other word I don't like, and the only way to effectively do it is to erase transgender people from public life. This is the stated policy goal of the Trump administration. And if you think that we are doing this bill to protect girls' sports, excuse me, you're not looking at what is happening at this moment in history. You cannot understand this effort outside of the larger right-wing MAGA effort to eradicate transgender people. You want to play sports? You can play sports, but you can't be trans when you do it. You want to be in the military? Well, you can't be in the military if you're trans, so just detransition. You want to get health care? You want to get a passport? You want to live in a prison in which you are respected as who you are? You want to take a class in school? You want to learn about your history? Of course you can do those things. We would never say you can't do them. You just can't be trans. It is pure erasure of a community based on who they are. And I gotta tell you, I don't think there's ever been a movement in the history of the world that has been favorably looked upon by history for looking at kids, determining that there is a characteristic about them you may not like, and cutting them out and excluding them. That's what this bill does. I know we continue to hear it is a simple bill about fairness, but this was not an issue in 2015 when trans kids stuck to the wall, and it's not an issue today. We haven't heard a single piece of testimony in committee or on the floor of an actual problem being caused by trans girls in sports. There's been a lot of feelings. A lot of people are nervous. A lot of people think a lot of parents think it might be bad for kids. But you know what we haven't heard? A single person say, this happened on my kid's team, and it's a problem. Several states have banned trans kids from playing sports without finding one transgender athlete in the whole damn state. Don't tell us this is about fairness in sports. There's no problem. You can't even point to a problem. It is about trans kids stuck to the wall. We are going to make this our cause, and until we lose it like we lost gay marriage, we're going to beat it to death. Beat it to death. Well, that's what's happening, and it's very difficult to be the subject of that. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that what's happened has gone from trans people to specifically trans girls and trans women. And one thing we keep hearing is that trans women should not participate in girls' sports. And I gotta tell you, they don't. Trans women participate in women's sports. Trans girls participate in girls' sports. You have invented a threat, and you have alienated children because of that threat being invented for political purposes. And these are factual things stated by the movement leaders in this country that have now transported it into the White House, where a really bad man who has been held criminally liable for some really bad acts towards women is now using his power and his billionaire friend's power to target children. You can call that what you want, but we just use our eyes. You say you use your eyes, we use our eyes. We say bullying is bullying. And there's nothing left to say about it. Please vote against this. Please stop doing this. I'm just going to make a plea from my side to yours as the only trans woman in this body. Please stop doing this. We have data. We know facts. Trans women are not a threat to cisgender women. Trans girls are not a threat to cisgender girls. You will never find reliable data showing otherwise. We have not knew these things have been studied far longer than you even knew we existed before 2015, when you were specifically politically told this is the movement that matters. put everything you have into it. So just recognize we don't need to do this, and you're going to end up hurting a lot of people, a lot more than you already have. Thank you for the time. Trans liberation now.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Speaker Namath. I have a few questions about this bill. Will the author of this bill, Representative Scott, yield to a few questions?
Representative Scott will yield. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott. How do you imagine this bill being enforced?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative, the enforcement of this bill won't change much from what is happening now. The current law says that because girls were discriminated in sports for so many years, that they're entitled to their own teams. So really the main thing in this bill that is changing is because we have to add a definition for the word female.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So you're saying that things will that the high school league and will Representative Scott continue to yield?
Representative Scott will continue to yield. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott. So if things are going to happen just the way they're already happening, why not stick to the original policy of the high school league? That's what's happening right now, and if that's working fine, why bother having this bill?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Jordan, because the high school league has decided to question what they should do about a federal Title IX matter that has been issued, and so they're trying to find what the accurate interpretation of statute is, so we're trying to make it abundantly clear in this statute.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott. Members, to be clear, the high school league is not asking for this bill, and there isn't any miscommunication about what this bill does. What is happening is the high school league has had a policy in place for 10 years that says that kids get to just play sports on whichever team they want, and that has been working. There isn't a need for this bill, and we could have just adopted the language that was already working with the DE11 amendment, but we voted that down. And will Representative Scott yield to a few more questions?
Representative Scott will yield. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott. This bill, as it was introduced, mentioned that enforcement would be based on an athlete's anatomy, chromosomes, and hormone analysis. Could the high school league use these tests when evaluating a girl's eligibility?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Jordan, that bill's not the one before us.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott. So what should the high school league use to evaluate an athlete's eligibility to play on the team of their choice?
Are you asking Representative Scott to yield?
I am, Madam Speaker. Thank you. And would Representative Scott yield to that question?
Representative Scott will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're asking the high school league to abide by the language of this bill, should it pass.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott, for answering those questions. But when you don't state what the enforcement is, then all enforcement is possible. Testifiers in favor of this bill stated that there should be physical exams for athletes. And members, I'm willing to state unequivocally that that is wrong. This bill attacks all children and will subject any child, cisgender, trans, non-binary, two-spirit, to scrutiny over their bodies, could result in them having invasive tests and chromosome analysis done in order to play a sport, and will ultimately result in fewer children playing sports. And that's wrong. And this bill is ultimately an attack on girls' participation in athletics. This bill bullies children. It subjects all children who want to participate in school sports to, at minimum, justify why they should get to play on that sports team that they should be able to play on. Bullying has no place in our schools, and it also has no place in our statutes. And members, as adults, we should know that bullying is wrong. But bullying is what this bill is, and bullying is what hearing this bill in the Minnesota House is. This might surprise you, but I actually played sports in junior high, and you probably will not be surprised to learn that I was a very, very, very bad basketball player. But I was a basketball player. And sports are important. It was good for me to play those sports because I learned about grit and perseverance sitting on that bench. But I also learned about getting dunked on, literally, in junior high, and I learned a lot about that. I spent most of that career on the bench, but I did learn that I could dribble. I could run. I also learned that I really liked moving my body, even if it looked a lot more like dancing and cheerleading and hiking and biking rather than, nailing layups or shooting threes or, all those things that everyone could do but me. The other thing I know, members, is that I would not have played basketball if I had to prove that I was a girl to do so. There are real issues in girls' sports. There are real issues around eating disorders and self-worth. This bill will make that worse. There are real issues around pay equity for girls and women in sports. And there are real issues around girls' safety. But one of those issues is not all of the issues you heard about on the floor today. We have heard a lot from Representatives Finke and Moeller about what violence against women looks like, and it is not playing on a volleyball team with your classmates. To the trans, non-binary, and two-spirit community, you should not have been subjected to this bullying today. You are valid, seen, and important. And I am sorry that the Minnesota House is bullying you right now. I will be voting no this evening, and I'm glad that my community will see me vote no. And I hope history will see you joining me in voting no.
I recognize the member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Speaker Demuth. Members, first of all, I just want to say how the Education Policy Committee handled this bill, House File 12, so well. Just a couple weeks ago, it was heard in that committee. And members on both sides of that table were very respectful, followed decorum, and the public did too. And I think all of us really appreciated that. It was awesome. It went long. There was a lot of passion on both sides, but it was very respectful. So I want to thank members on that committee and the public as well who was involved, because I think it went very well and respectfully handled. So one thing that I shared during that time, I would like to share on the floor here. And first of all, I'll say, members, that this bill, House File 12, is about fairness, safety, and preserving girls' sports in Minnesota. That's the simple fact of the bill. And thank you, Representative Scott, for carrying this. This bill has personal meaning to me. So this will age me a bit, but when I was in 9th grade, that's when the Title IX legislation passed and was signed into law. It took a few years to take effect. And when I was a senior in high school, my high school had its very first girls basketball team. And I got to become a member of that team. And it was amazing. I was pretty shy and withdrawn at that time, and it did a lot of good for me. My generation of girls and women and the generations before fought hard for Title IX to have our own female sports. You can imagine how terrible, and I'll say it was when I was in 12th grade, we girls played basketball because we didn't grow up with it, and it wasn't something that we were very good at, but we loved it. Had there been any males on that team, they would have destroyed us because we just didn't have the experience. So I want to see what was fought for maintained with Title IX. And I think the generations now, and we heard some of those young girls in our committee hearing, for carrying on this fight for women and girls. Because our bodies are different than male bodies, and we need our own sports. So I just want to say from my heart that I'm thankful that Title IX passed. I want to see it continued, because we need to preserve girls' sports in Minnesota, and we need fairness and safety for all of those girls. Thank you, members.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I request a call of the House.
Call of the House has been requested. Do I see 10 hands? There will be a call of the House. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members who are participating remotely.
Hussein.
Here you go. Here you go.
Hussein present.
Hussein, present. Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
The clerk will close the roll. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, House File 12 is a bill about fairness, safety, and preserving girls' sports in Minnesota. It ensures that the protections and opportunities created by Title IX remain in place for the next generation of female athletes in Minnesota. For more than 50 years, Title IX has guaranteed women and girls the right to compete on a level playing field. Thanks to the sacrifices and determination of previous generations, like Representative Bennett, Title IX became a reality, paving the way for continued growth and expansion of athletic opportunities for women and girls. As a parent and as a coach, I've seen firsthand how important these opportunities are for girls. Our daughter played youth sports, middle school sports, and high school sports, and today she's a collegiate athlete. There's a lot more to the story, and I know many of you have heard it, but suffice it to say that she's an overcomer. Through her experience and my own coaching youth sports over the years, I've witnessed the invaluable life lessons that sports teach: hard work, teamwork, the ability to win and lose with dignity, grit, how to respond to failure, and persevere through disappointment. These are lessons that serve young athletes far beyond the playing field, but those lessons can only be driven home if competition is fair and competition is safe. If sports were simply about exercise, we wouldn't have teams, divisions, or championships, and we wouldn't need to talk about any of this stuff. But that's not why we compete. Competition pushes athletes to be their best, to set goals, to work together as a team, and to achieve things they never thought possible. Fair competition is what makes sports meaningful, and it's the reason why athletes work so hard to achieve victory. That principle, fair competition, is exactly why we have divisions in sports at all. We have age divisions. We have different weight classes. In high school football in Minnesota, we have classes ranging from 9-person all the way to 6A. Divisions in sports are essential, and they're common sense because we fundamentally understand a school with a graduating class of 75 would not compete in the same division as the largest schools in the state. That wouldn't be fair, and that wouldn't be safe. That's because fairness in competition matters. If Democrats truly believe there are no athletic differences between different groups of people, where does it stop? Should we eliminate boys and girls divisions entirely? Should middle school athletes compete against high school seniors? Should we get rid of junior varsity and varsity teams? Of course not. But listening to the overheated rhetoric and, frankly, some of the unacceptable language from Democrats we've heard today, I wonder why they think that we should have sports divisions at all. Should we even have girls' sports? What's the point of girls' sports? These sports divisions exist for a reason, to create fair and meaningful competition. And House File 12 is straightforward and common sense. It ensures that girls' sports remain fair and competitive by preventing biological males from competing in female events. We have seen far too many cases of female athletes losing championships, losing scholarships, losing records because they were forced to compete against biologically male athletes that have an inherent advantage because of their biology. We've also heard tragic stories of young women suffering injuries in contact sports under these conditions. That is not fairness, and that is unsafe. Members, this should not be a controversial proposal. It's common sense, and that's why a vast majority of Americans agree. A recent New York Times poll found that 79% of Americans believe girls' sports should be reserved for girls only, including 67% of Democrats. Parents, coaches, and athletes overwhelmingly support the principles this legislation upholds. They understand that fairness in competition is not controversial, it's not exclusionary, it's not bullying, it's not genocide. It is a fundamental expectation of sports. That's why we must act now to ensure that female athletes continue to have equal opportunities in fair competition. The young women, like my daughter, who train, sacrifice, and dedicate themselves to their sports should not be denied the fairness and safety they expect and the fairness and safety they deserve. Members, I urge you to support House File 12. Let's make sure that the opportunities created by Title IX remain strong for future generations. Members, please vote green.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, it's hard to think of an uglier bill than the one we have before us today. The GOP could have picked any bill to bring before us today, and instead of talking about real issues that Minnesotans are actually struggling with, like the high cost of groceries, housing, and childcare, the GOP is using their time on the floor to bring up bills bullying our youth. You'll notice that Representative Niska didn't give one single example of a Minnesotan that this is actually impacting. That's because in Minnesota, girls' sports are thriving. Minnesota is a national leader for athletic participation rates in girls' high school sports, and this is not new. We have had participation standards in the state since 2014 when the high school league policy was enacted with no negative impacts on participation rates. So the example that we've seen in our state is exactly the opposite. The policies we have are working. This bill aims at a fake problem manufactured to divide us for attempted political gain. And why? Because it's easy to pick on the most marginalized in our community. There is a long history of using marginalized kids as pawns in political games. Ruby Bridges was the first black child to attend a whites-only elementary school after Brown versus Board. The National Guard had to accompany her to school. And Ruby recalled years later a white boy in her school telling her, "My mom said not to play with you because you're an N-word." She said the boy wasn't trying to be racist, he was just telling her why the adults in his life wouldn't let them play together. This bill today is adults saying to our kids, you are not welcome to play together. And to some of our kids, you don't belong on any sports team at all. Think about what message adults are sending to all of our kids with that statement. One of my constituents has a trans daughter who is on the ski team. If she were made to play on the boys' team, it would out her to her teammates and coaches. What safety problem would we be solving by having a middle school skier not ski on her team? None at all. But it would increase her safety risk if she had to out herself and force herself to play on the boys' team. So if we want to talk about kids' safety, letting her play on the team that she identifies with is the safe thing. Her mom said, like any parents, we want our child to experience team sports, to learn about teamwork and working hard towards a goal. We are just parents who want what's best for our child, and our daughter is just a teenager who has many of the same worries, same joys, and same hopes as many of her peers. This past fall, one of my kids played on a soccer team. The team wasn't very good. We won some, we lost a lot more. The kids had a blast running around, they kicked the ball. Every once in a while they scored a goal. But the main reason they were there was for the snacks. On my kids' team, one of the players was a young trans kid. None of the kids knew. Most of the parents didn't know. And it didn't matter one bit. The child's parents said to me, what do we want kids to learn through youth sports? We want them to learn to play together, to have fun together. We want kids to connect to kids. We should just let kids play. What safety problem would we be solving by having my kid not allowed to play on that same team? None. What would have happened under this law if one of the parents on my team had accused the kid of not being the right gender to play? They would be subject to a test of some kind. They would be outed in front of their friends and peers, maybe against their will, maybe leading to them being bullied. What good would it do for an elementary school soccer team to say that kids can't play sports together? Who is that making safer? This bill is not only cruel, it's harmful. It would lead not to just kids bullying other kids, but adults bullying them too, calling them out in front of their friends. It would put requirements on all girls to prove that they can play on a team. I note that Representative Scott dodged all the questions she was asked on enforcement. And the bill itself pulled back some of the language on enforcement to make it intentionally vague, but it requires that it be enforced. So how would it be? Would it be through invasive medical exams, through forced medical testing, through pelvic exams? The high school league is required, legally obligated, to enforce the bill around requirements related to fertility. That is the requirement of this bill. And however it's enforced, it would apply to every single girl that wants to play on a school sports team, down to 5-year-olds. It seems to me that many of my colleagues across the aisle simply don't want trans or non-binary kids to exist. But guess what? They do. As my constituent parent told me, trans kids aren't scary. They're just kids. And it's so joyful to know and love them. With the daily attacks at the federal level and now here at the state today, it's a scary time to be a trans kid or a family with a trans kid. So to any trans or non-binary kids or families listening, know that you are seen, you are cared for, and you are loved, and we won't let Minnesota be the home of bigotry or bullying directed at our youth. This bill would move us back decades of state civil rights law. It waives all contrary laws because otherwise it would be in clear violation of the fundamental protections of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. We see House File 12 for what it really is, an ugly attempt to divide us that does nothing to address the real challenges Minnesotans are facing. Votes against human and civil rights never wear well over time. So I ask my colleagues across the aisle, think about how you want to be remembered as you're casting your vote today. Members, vote no.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this bill really is not complicated. The enforcement mechanisms that are in place today are going to be the same enforcement mechanisms under this law. It's a red herring to say otherwise. Members, we did hear in committee from brave young girls that came to testify about injuries, I remember one girl was shoved to the ground by a male on the opposing side, breaking her wrist in 3 places. Don't say that it's not happening. And if it isn't happening on a broad scale here in Minnesota, we just need to look across the country and the world. I mean, the UN report that Representative Rarick referred to, it's not like the UN is a bastion of conservatism or right-wing Christian stuff, right? The UN found very interesting findings in that report. But members, I want us to really focus on what this bill does and how we got here in our history. This legislation, and this is the enacting clause in 121A, the statute that's being amended with this bill. And this is how it says in the purpose statement. The legislature recognizes certain past inequities in access to athletic programs and in various degrees of athletic opportunity previously afforded members of each sex, race, and ethnicity. The purpose of this section is to provide an equal opportunity for members of each sex and members of all races and ethnicities to participate in athletic programs. Throughout this statute, there's language that speaks to past limitations and discrimination based on one's sex. This chapter acknowledges that for decades, males had great privilege in athletics and opportunities and programs while girls were sidelined. This chapter is Minnesota's Title IX chapter. 121A04 sub 3A actually reads, "It is not an unfair discriminatory practice to restrict membership on an athletic team to participants of one sex whose overall athletic opportunities have been limited." That's girls. In addition to defining female, House File 12 is in keeping with the rest of Chapter 121 and seeks to protect and preserve girls' sports teams for only girls. We cannot allow our girls to be vulnerable to losing their spot on the team, being on the podium, or to injury by a male teammate or male competitor. That is not safe, and it's not fair for our girls. It is our duty to protect female athletes in the state of Minnesota. Girls and women have had numerous awards, medals, and championships robbed from them by trans-identifying males. We heard about that from Representative Rarick's testimony. While we have been accused of disregarding the feelings of the trans athlete, but what about the feelings of the many girls who have had the podium and awards and medals and scholarships lost to biological male athletes? Are we to ignore the feelings and actual science and safety of females for a small percentage of biological males? In committee, we did hear from 4 physicians, long-practicing physicians, by the way, about the science. These are some of the things that we learned. Even from a young age, boys have a physical advantage over girls. Puberty is beginning earlier and earlier for both boys and girls. It is a biological fact that trans girls are not female. Gender identity is psychological and philosophical, it's not biological. Even if a male receives hormone treatments or sex change surgeries, biological males will always have the physiological advantage: stronger, faster, larger heart, more lung capacity. And the injuries girls are getting from trans-identifying athletes bear this out. 3 females, here are some examples. 3 female high school players in Massachusetts were injured in the first half of a basketball game by a trans-identifying male athlete. The team with the 3 injured players ended up forfeiting at halftime. 1 North Carolina volleyball player by the name of Peyton McNabb was knocked out by a trans-identifying male athlete when that athlete spiked the ball into her face. McNabb explains, "I was severely injured in a high school volleyball game by a transgender athlete on the opposing team. I suffered from a concussion and a neck injury that to this day I am still recovering from. Other injuries I still suffer from today include impaired vision, partial paralysis on my right side, constant headaches, as well as anxiety and depression." And then there was 1 female field hockey player in Massachusetts that had her teeth knocked out by a trans-identifying player. And I heard an awful lot of the word bullying on the other side of the aisle today. If those aren't examples of bullying, I don't know what is. We are preserving girls' sports that were made possible decades ago by hard-fought passage of Title IX. Title IX was championed and authored by a Democrat woman from Hawaii by the name of Patsy Minks, who had been shunned her entire life because she was a woman. From trying to get into numerous medical schools to trying to get the nomination to be the first Congresswoman, her first attempt at that, she was shunned because she was a woman. But she kept fighting for all of us girls and our futures. Because of her tireless efforts, I was able to play girls basketball. There's no way I could have earned a spot on the boys' team in junior high or high school, nor was it ever a thing that I even considered, because I had the option of a girls-only team. It was common sense. Title IX was a victory for women who were sidelined from sports for decades. When it passed with great opposition, the law did not tell women, "Now go try out for the boys or the men's team." Nope. It provided a new opportunity. It was understood that there was a physical difference between 2 sexes, and girls were to have their own teams. Minnesota's so-called Title IX Chapter 121A makes it clear in the purpose statement, which I read, that girls deserve girls-only teams. So girls-only teams are a way of making up for lost opportunity by girls, as well as making a safe and fair playing field. This is about fairness and opportunity. Everyone who can meet tryouts should be able to play sports in Minnesota. This is about bodies, allowing bodies to compete on their own level playing field, female with female, male with male. When Title IX was passed, no one could have imagined biological males forfeiting their well-established privilege and athletic accommodations to have them don the cloak of a female and use the rights established for women to muscle women off the podium and deny women their right to fair play. A vote for House File 12 is a vote for my new friend Laurel. Laurel testified bravely. She's 14 years old. She testified in the Education Policy Committee. And Laurel was involved in a really terrible skiing accident in 2023, late 2023. She broke 5 bones in her back, amongst other injuries. And she has worked really hard over the last year to get back to the swimming pool. She's a swimmer. She's worked tirelessly. She said, by the time I started my freshman swim season, I was mostly recovered. However, my times were still not as good as prior to the accident. I worked incredibly hard during my season and finally started to see results as some of my times started to drop. I was able to make the section team, but despite my hard work, I did not make it to state this year. I have seen my 2 older brothers swim at the state meet, and it has become a goal of mine to eventually get there. I cannot imagine having a biological male swim against me and take a spot in the top 16 to get to go to state in an event after all of this hard work, time, and dedication that I have put to overcome my adversity. I would absolutely be devastated to see my dream awarded to someone who will always have an advantage over me. A vote for House File 12 is a vote for Laurel. A vote for House File 12 is a vote to ensure fair and safe athletic opportunities for our daughters, our granddaughters, nieces, and friends. You are sending the message that you value their early morning and late evening practices, their personal and team goals, their fight back from a sprained ankle or other injury, not to mention the life lessons and self-confidence gained in the athletic arena. You are protecting their safety and opportunities for scholarships to play at a higher level, not to have that opportunity yanked from them by a bigger, stronger, faster male. You are voting for safe and fair competition for girls who for decades had no athletic opportunities. If you vote no on House File 12, you are rendering Title IX meaningless and telling this generation of female athletes they are invisible, that their femaleness is irrelevant, that you do not care for their safety or about fair athletic competition for them. It's common sense, and everyone in this room knows a female cannot and should not compete with males. I want to end with 2 quotes. One from Beth Stelzer, and she is a power lifter. She wrote an article recently, by the way, and this is taken from that article. If we allow men who identify as female to compete in women's sports, there will be men's sports and there will be co-ed sports. But women's sports will cease to exist. This is why I'm fighting to save women's sports. And I'll end with this final quote from Caitlyn Jenner. And I remember when Caitlyn Jenner was a decathlete, I watched Caitlyn Jenner, then Bruce Jenner, win. That was quite a moment in sports. But this is what Caitlyn Jenner says. This is a question of fairness, she said. That's why I oppose biological boys who are trans competing in girls' sports in school. It's just not fair. And we want to protect girls' sports in our schools. Members, vote for common sense. Vote to protect our girls. Vote for fairness and safety in girls' sports. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the members participating remotely.
Hussein.
Here you go. Hussein, no.
Hussein votes no. Momani Hiltsley.
Here you go, Hulda.
Momani Hiltsley, no.
Momani Hiltsley votes no.
The clerk will close the roll.
Madam Speaker, Niska changes from aye to nay.
Representative Niska changes from aye to nay. There being 66 yeas and 67 nays, the bill does not pass. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to reconsider and request a roll call.
Representative Niska has moved to reconsider. A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any discussion? Seeing no further, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Hussein.
Hussein, no.
Hussein votes no. Momani Hiltsley.
Here you go, Hulda.
Momani Hiltsley, no.
Momani Hiltsley, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 66 ayes and 66 nays, the motion prevails. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the call of the House be lifted.
Madam Speaker.
Representative Niska moves that the call of the House be lifted. All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Madam Speaker, point of
Long.
parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
On the vote before the lifting of the call of the House, you'd announced it as a tie. I just wanted to clarify.
I had announced the vote as 67 ayes, 66 nays, and the motion prevailed. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that House File 12 be laid on the table.
Members, this is a non-debatable motion. All in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails. Members, we are reverting to messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate file number 1360. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate bills.
First reading of Senate file number 1360, an act relating to public safety. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Transportation, Finance, and Policy.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
DePel moves that House File number 348 be recalled from the Committee on Capital Investment and be re-referred to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize the member from Washington, Representative DePel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion. and I'd like to move and recall HF 348 from Capital Investment and re-refer it to Environment and Natural Resource Finance Policy. I've spoken with both chairs, and they agree with my motion.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative DePel yield to a question?
Representative DePel will yield to a question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative DePel, could you maybe describe the bill? Is this the bill that takes money from the 3M settlement and takes it from the trust and then sends it to another community?
That's correct.
Representative DePel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is correct. That is the bill. Unfortunately, about $400 million has been given to the community of Woodbury, while Hastings has been given 14.5. Now, they have a large bill. They're a smaller community. That's what the bill does.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative DePel would yield to another question.
Representative DePel will yield to another question. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative DePel, is this the bill with the court-ordered settlement that where you're taking the money from that communities were to receive funds from?
Representative DePel.
Hastings has been partially included for $14.5 million in the settlement. It was nearly $70 million that Hastings needed. That is the bill.
Representative Hansen. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Coulter moves that House File Number 1145 be recalled from the Committee on State Government Finance and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Elections, Finance, and Government Operations.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House File 1145 is a bill that some folks might actually find interesting. It would prohibit legislators from becoming lobbyists for 2 years after their term ends, and should have it lies squarely within Chapter 10A. And having spent more time in Chapter 10A than I dared dream before I took this job, I know that that falls within elections and government operations, not state government. Chair Nash and Chair Quam both agree, so let's send the bill there. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Freiberg.
Will Representative Coulter yield to a question?
Representative Coulter will yield. Representative Freiberg.
Representative Coulter, did you speak to the ranking Democrat on the Elections and Government Operations Committee about this bill?
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I try not to speak to the ranking DFLer on that particular committee as often as possible.
Representative Freiberg. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Anderson, PH, moves that Senate File Number 1552 be recalled from the Committee on Agriculture, Finance, and Policy, and together with House File Number 1063, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Yes, this is the bill that pertains to small elevators. We passed it out of the House Ag Committee. Then a couple of amendments got added in the Senate, and the two bills kind of crossed paths. And the Senate bill now is back in the Ag Committee's domain. So we want to have these bills looked at by the Chief Clerk and hopefully can get it back to the House floor. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Announcements. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until noon, Wednesday, March 5th, 2025.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until noon, Wednesday, March 5th, 2025. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Representative Niska.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until noon Wednesday, March 5th, 2025.